we can play a part. And then that part gets, identified through various zoning codes and, your land division or your subdivision controls. And how do you offer the flexibility to allow a potential developer to be able to help you accomplish what would be a county goal? And so that's an everyday struggle, having an urban area, having a rural area. Sometimes it brings a little bit of conflict because you hear about density, or that's too dense, or that's not dense enough, or, do you have the appropriate amount of land?
Yeah. Okay, the Jentry Podcast. I know that you will be loving it. We here to break it down so that you start to understand your local government. Who are the leaders? Time to get active, do something about it. Dealing with jobs, the workforce, and affordable housing. Motivate and inspire. Elevate, take it higher. For the next generation. Knowledge is power for your community. Giving you the info that you really need. Time to make a change and a difference. Tune in, don't miss it. It's the Jentry. The Jentry Podcast. The Jentry Podcast. Making a change, switching it up.
Hello, and welcome to the Jentry Podcast today. We have an incredible guest. I am your host, Jonathan Mason, but with me we have Todd Willis, who is the Village Administrator of Caledonia, Wisconsin. And this is going to be a great episode. He brings a wealth of knowledge of everything Wisconsin. In our first conversation, he was bouncing around telling me about different areas in their government and their politics. And that wealth of knowledge is what I wanted to share today. So before we jump into it, Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. The weather's changing here in Wisconsin. We're getting from we have really two seasons. We have winter and then we have summer. And so we're getting to that little short stint that we call spring here in Wisconsin.
I can understand that. I've done some long stint in Boston, and it was a very short spring, but a beautiful spring. So I can definitely attest to that. But as I always like to start, let's get right into it. So Todd, what is the secret sauce of Caledonia? What makes it the best place to live in the entire United States?
I would say for the Village of Caledonia, it's going to be the landscape. We have a lot of different aspects that can drive residents in a lot of different ways. Right on the shore of Lake Michigan, so you have access to one of the largest bodies of fresh water in the world. And then you also have kind of an urban area, and then you have your more rural and farm areas as well. So it's a good mixture of blend between kind of all these different little aspects of life that I think people usually look for one way or the other. Have something to offer anybody that wants to live here.
I love that. I've always loved living in places where you can do a ton of different things. And I do like that everyone can find something that is their own. So I'm excited. I always say this. I said it many times on the podcast. You can truly learn about a community by learning about their leaders. So just take it a few steps back. So what was it childhood like? Do you always know you wanted to get in public service? And what was the journey to get here?
It's been a long journey to get to where I am right now, but I've always kind of had this belief inside that I wanted to do something that improved people's lives or make things better. And it originally started with, when I went to school, I started in the political science and law studies realm. And it was through, I guess, a network of mentors or people in my life that led me to look at public administration as an opportunity where, maybe you get to touch a little bit more on making people's lives better than being a politician, so to speak. So I guess that's what drove me to it. Career-wise, interned for a handful of communities in the Milwaukee metropolitan area, which led me to do economic development for the city of Brookfield, which is a first-ring community or second-ring community outside of the Milwaukee metropolitan area. And once I got involved in that, and being able to interact with residents, business owners, the school district, right, expanding the role of economic development through that position you couldn't turn me away. And then the next logical step for that beyond that was to look at village administration or, a village manager, city administrator, whatever the role was for the community. And I take that, I don't take that responsibility lightly, but I also lead by example. I'm always interested in talking to residents. They don't necessarily always have to agree with my, my viewpoints or what I'm trying to accomplish. But, the more you listen to everybody, the more knowledge you can gain. And so that's really where the political side, I guess, that I had aspirations for as a kid to where I am now. I guess that would be where it all mends. And then I actually have the ability to improve people's daily lives, whether it's in the business community, residents, recreation, all aspects of village government.
Wow. I love that. It feels like the spark was always there, but through experience and proximity, it took a little bit of a refinement to get to the position that worked well for you and allows you to support the people in your community, which is great. Now on that, I'd love to hear what are some of the priorities of Caledonia. Have you guys done a strategic plan, comprehensive plan recently? What are you guys kind of focused on for the near term?
Right. So when I got hired here in September of 2024, they were just getting to the finalization of their park and open space plan. And that was kind of the basis to then take the next step, which was their comprehensive plan. We're in the middle of doing that right now. It's about an 18-month process. Is kind of how the planning department laid it out. We've just gotten through our survey actually ends at the end of the month, and we've done our stakeholder meetings with different stakeholder groups, and we'll take some of that information and then tie it to, other goals and initiatives or the vision from residents, the village board, business leaders, and staff's role in that is really just to help guide that discussion, necessarily choose the path that the village is going to go, but take the information that's provided to village staff through all of the different public participation methods and guide what we did. We created a special comprehensive plan subcommittee of the Plan Commission. And so we take all the information and we kind of feed it to them. And then based on their responses, we'll guide what are the goals and objectives on the 9 required elements based on state statute on how we connect the dots from park and open space plan to the comprehensive plan. But it is really the vision. I would say sometimes because it is statutorily required to update your comprehensive plan and your park and open space plan, sometimes maybe they just become requirements that are done and then placed on a shelf. But I really tie all of these things or direct my staff to tie all of these things to everyday operations within the village. It touches on a lot of different topics within the community. And so for me, I use it as a metric for really how I do reviews of department heads, right? We take these goals and objectives and we will probably look to implement them into our budget as kind of like an operational statement. And that's something I learned from being in economic development in the city of Brookfield. It was one of the things that I took away from that community and said, that's really ingenious. You take those goals and objectives and it's not just easy goals and objectives, but it's, you have some long-term goals and objectives and then you have some other ones. And then the next year you explain how you or the department has achieved some of those goals or objectives or where you are in that process. And for the residents, that becomes an informational piece, right? There's always usually some level of disconnect between what is really happening at Village Hall or in government. And this provides that opportunity to say, here's all the things that we do, and here's our metrics for those, but then here's some goals and objectives based on plans provided by staff community input. And here's how we're going to achieve those, or here's what we're working on to achieve those. And I think that's probably one of the most important pieces when, you're kind of implementing this focus. Communities have a lot of different avenues that they want to see things happening. And this is just one way that we can showcase, we heard you, and now this is how we're going to try to implement.
I think that is so important, Todd. I was having a conversation with another municipal leader, and what he was sharing with me, and I'd heard many times. He stated that sometimes in his seat, he feels that the majority of people that represent and make up the community think working families are unable to make it to the town hall meetings, the council meetings, to public input, public comment, and it's tough because more organized groups that have the time can get there and they can have their opinions laid out and often responded to. But I loved that you are taking the time to be very deliberate in crafting the goals of the strategic plan and then providing the community the ability. It sounds like they can just kind of come in, or they can look at a dashboard and they can know what is actually going on. So I definitely applaud you there, because that is something that hits me because I hear it so often, that disconnect. It's the people that you really want to support sometimes don't have the voice. So I commend you on that.
And I would add that I always try to break down that barrier of individuals who may not have the time or don't have the time commitment to come to meetings. I've been very vocal since I got here. I have a very strict open door policy that goes for employees, but that also goes for residents. I will stop what I'm doing. I will listen to a concern or to an idea that somebody in the community is interested in, and then kind of walk through how that happens, or what is the best way for us to be able to accomplish that goal, right? Is it something that you need? Is it a policy decision that you need the village board's, authority, or they need to direct staff? Or is it something we can do administratively? But I'm always handing out my business card. I hand it out to anybody that I interact with, and I always employ people. I'm an email or phone call away. I answer them all the time. And I like to be very available for not only my staff, but also for any member of the community or any member of the community outside of our community. It could be another public official somewhere else. I'm always available is kind of how I look at it.
I love that. Just that to that same municipal leader I'm speaking about, his thing was like, I have to be in the community. That's the only way that I'm going to reach out to those people. And yeah, giving a card, and even just encourage, like you said, encouraging people. If you call, if you email, I will get back to you. It may not be immediately, but I will get back to you. I think that just, I know as a resident of the community myself, if the leadership is telling me, reach out, then I will definitely do that. Now, across the nation, one thing we have seen, especially after all the interviews I did in season one, housing comes up often. I know you haven't done your completed your strategic plan, but could you just maybe walk through what housing looks like in Caledonia? Is there any issue with attainability, affordability? Is housing great, and all the housing stock that you need is kind of there? I'm just kind of curious to get an idea of what it looks like.
Sure. So for the village of Caledonia, we rely on the Racine County Economic Development Corporation, and they handle some of the economic development aspects around the county. And they did a housing study, and it was for Racine County, the entire county, and it identified a shortfall in kind of homes within a specific range. We had homes across the board, and there's apartments, but there were shortages within a couple different areas, and they had identified this range that communities in Racine County should be looking to build homes within that range or have homes available within that range. And so I rely on that data to kind of look and see how can we as a community chip in. We're not going to solve the entire housing crisis or shortfall in Racine County, but we can play a part. And then that part gets, identified through various zoning codes and, your land division or your subdivision controls. And how do you offer the flexibility to allow a a potential developer to be able to help you accomplish what would be a county goal. And so that's an everyday struggle, having an urban area, having a rural area. Sometimes it brings a little bit of conflict because you hear about density, or that's too dense, or that's not dense enough, or, do you have the appropriate amount of land, right? The zoning code and subdivision controls, they're not necessarily meant to be intertwined, but they do work together. And so how do you, as a community, identify ways to create the opportunities to allow the housing stock within that range and meet those needs? And that takes conversations with elected officials, that takes conversations with residents, current residents, it takes conversations with developers. How do they utilize their pro forma to help us kind of tackle this missing middle type of housing? And there's a couple different theories of how you can look at that and how you tackle that issue. But for me, it goes beyond that as well, because I like to engage with the business community. The economic development side of my past tells me I need to work with the school districts. I need to work with, county partners. I need to work with transportation. I need to work with our business leaders, our largest employers. What kind of struggles are they having in finding or having the appropriate amount of employees for operational? And then taking all of that information and kind of blending it, right? And it becomes what challenges do your employees have coming to work? And then what challenges do your employees have as far as living? Are they coming from 20 miles away, 30 miles away? Where are your employees coming from? And sometimes that's hard to retrieve that information. But when you talk about the overall goal of what, how you take that information and how you'll use that to benefit the company. A, I don't want to lose the company, but B, I want to be able to support them in a way that makes it easier for their employers or for their employees. Turnover is costly. Try to find avenues to eliminate that. I can't eliminate it completely, but I can do my piece, or the community can do its piece to kind of help structure housing in a way that benefits everybody. And then there's the transportation piece and working with the county. How do we get people that maybe don't have two cars? Maybe they have one car, but it's a 2-person family. One person needs the car. How do I get that other person? And so those are big challenges, but those are conversations that have to continually be had so that nobody loses the focus of what we're trying to accomplish.
Wow, I think that's so smart. And I'm seeing, I started smiling because I can kind of see that economic development past kind of bleeding through into some of your answers. But I think it's effective to really look at it and holistically to understand the entirety of the needs of the communities and how they intersect. But I do want to take a step back. You said some very interesting things along housing, and it sounds like you have a good relationship with the development community. With kind of what you're seeing now, what was some of the feedback they were given to make deals pencil? And then the second thing I would ask is, like, how many developments do you guys have maybe this year or in previous years? How has that process been going?
So the feedback from developers, so we have here in Caledonia, we utilize conservation subdivisions. And so those are meant to cluster development within an area, but then conserve either common open space or public open space, however the developer wants to achieve those goals. And then there's bonuses that are given to the density based on kind of different metrics. I think you can receive up to 20% or 25% of a bonus on your density based on the attributes of what you're supplying. And there's specific criteria that goes within that. So part of the feedback is when you utilize the structure that we currently have in place for the rural area, it's 60% open space. And then for the urban area, it's 40% open space. There's lots of conversations about what should be defined as common open space, what should be included, what shouldn't be included. And so historically, the village has been offering waivers because it becomes very hard for development to happen if you have to give up 40% of your space or 60% of your space. And right now, the village is going through some proposed edits to that subdivision ordinance by staff to kind of see if there's a way that we can still bridge that gap. Development can still happen, but it's more structured, a little bit more structured, and then it's still achieving the goals of open space and conservation and public use, but also allowing for a level of density that is attainable for a developer to do project. One way that I always kind of look at housing and how we're tackling some of the housing development here in Caledonia is I talk a lot about life cycle housing. You need to have housing for all different stages of life. I'm sure there are some people that right out of high school, they were able to afford or had some mechanism that they could buy a home. I was not that fortunate. It took me a long time after high school to be able to buy a home. So you got to look at what is affordable from an apartment standpoint, community type living. And from there, you look at your mid-sized single family homes to maybe you have your family is growing and then you're in a maybe more mid to large size family home. But then you have the later parts of life where you still want to be a part of the community and you don't want to leave the community that you've laid down roots in for so long. How do we transition those people to more aging friendly type living arrangements? Is it single story condos? Or is it some type of senior living? Or is there, what are all of the stages of life and how do we as a community provide those to residents? We want residents to come here, but we also want them to stay here. We want them to find Caledonia so exceptional that they don't ever want to leave. And so right now we're in the process of looking. We have one apartment project that we're working on right now. And the goal is to utilize that, which is in one of our TID districts, to kind of help that kind of solve a vacant Kmart building that we've had here for quite some time. And so utilizing some housing projects within the TID district to be able to use that increment to solve another problem that has been identified kind of over and over and over again, even when I interviewed for the job. And so happy to say that we're kind of on that path. We're kind of working through the development agreements right now. And then, we'll kind of start working on those, solving the apartment piece or the early stage of life piece. And then we can work towards some of the other elements of life cycle housing.
Nice. I appreciate you breaking that down. And Todd, I think I did share this with you earlier. So I'd say about half of our viewership are municipal leaders, municipal government workers, and they're looking for strategies and innovative ways to look at things. But the other half are community members. So I'm going to have to ask you, can you break down what a TID is and how those districts are utilized to create the housing necessary that you were talking about?
So a TID district or a tax incremental financing district is a mechanism by which a community or local government organization can create a boundary. And each state kind of has their own rules and what type of tax incremental financing district it is, whether you're trying to remove blight or you're trying to create or incentivize business growth, business development, jobs. There's mixed use. In Wisconsin, there's a handful, and you can choose which avenue you're taking: industrial growth, manufacturing. But then what goes through that process is you have a series of meetings. You identify within a project plan the goals and objectives of what that tax incremental financing district is going to achieve or what it's meant to achieve, whether it's infrastructure or it's development and growth. And development and growth are an essential piece of tax incremental financing. So then when the district is looked at to be created, all of the taxing authorities review the project plan, what's outlined in the project plan, usually specifically related to a project that may be in the pipeline that needs some of this financial assistance to be able to, be achievable. So they review that. And then if they approve that district, it creates a tax freeze on the property with the current value of that district, regardless of how big that is. And then that tax money still is received by all the taxing authorities, but it freezes it at that. And then when the development occurs, the new taxes that are incurred based on the new value of the property based on development can then be used to incentivize the developer. If it's, you can use it as gap financing. Say there's a $3 million gap, then you're looking at what will this new project create in new taxes, and how do we use those taxes year over year to draw down that gap. So if there's a $3 million gap and you have a $30 million development, you're looking at that new taxes separated from the base value. And then if it's a pay as you go, you're providing that increment back to the developer at a specific rate or whatever is determined within the development agreement and acceptable by your governing body.
Nice. Thank you for breaking that down for us, Todd. And I just have one more question before we get into a little bit of fun with our last chance games. But you spoke of how you guys are doing a lot. So working with developers, looking at different ordinances to really spur housing. Now, you said there is a chunk of the community which is pretty rural. Do you all have any like municipally owned land or municipally owned property? And have you guys been able to utilize that to encourage or spur any development?
Well, we did. We have one. It's TID 5, and unfortunately, it's not necessarily a positive note. But in 2019, they created the TID. There was an old school that was no longer used by the school district, and an old publishing building or kind of like office building. And so the village created a blight TID that was meant to spur development. It's right on our lakefront. And unfortunately, over time, it became apparent that the development just wasn't going to be able to happen for whatever reasons. But we did have the bluff stabilized, and there is other development within the TID that is occurring. It's just the one sizable piece. And so just recently, we actually purchased the debt obligations from the developer so that the village does own the 20 acres on the lakefront. And now staff is working with various developers for creating what will be kind of like an RFP and what are the opportunities that exist, right? And for those, usually I talk about, maintaining the character. We have a Sienna sisters that live next door and they have a sizable property. So there's acreage, walking paths, wooded areas. I want to see a blend of how we incorporate kind of that piece into this new piece that the village owns. And so we talk about those things, but then we also talk about massing and scale. Across the street is single family homes. There's some elevation challenges on the site that we own. And so what I always also say is if I'm living across the street and I'm standing in my front yard, I want the viewpoint to look like I'm looking at another single family subdivision neighborhood. So whether it's 2-story townhomes or whether it's a 2-story condo development, however the developer wants to propose that idea. But the goal is that we allow some level of density to create basically a microcosm within this area along the lake. But outside of that, the village does not own much property. It is a question on the comprehensive plan survey. Would residents be interested if the village were able to do that? If the village found it to be reasonable to purchase certain properties within our TID districts, would they want us to do that so that then the village really controls what type of development is going to occur? Some communities feel like that's a good approach. Other communities don't. But I thought that that was a valid question to bring before the community as part of the survey. Because if it's publicly owned property, they really become part of the conversation. Is this an acceptable piece of fabric to the community, or is this something we should pass on and look for something else?
That's awesome. It seems like you guys are really being thoughtful and great stewards of taxpayer dollars, but also great stewards of the community in the sense of being sure that the community members are heard, and also getting creative. Something that didn't turn out the way you all expected. Sounds like it's going to be a great opportunity to create some density and provide more homes and opportunities for people to live in the community that you guys believe in. So that is great. And Todd, you're officially off the hot seat. So we will be shifting to our last chance games. So for these, think improv. It's whatever first comes to your head. I'm going to ask 3 questions in a row, and I just want a quick answer. And then after the third question, we'll circle back and excuse me, and then go through the questions. I'm going to read these off. We're going to have some fun. So, what policy is great on paper but nearly impossible to execute in real life?
Oh, man, I guess I'll have to come back to that one.
Yes.
Yes. I don't know. I'll think on that one for a second.
Okay. We'll circle back. What role do you not have on your staff that would change outcomes immediately?
I would say probably, we're working towards it, but a communications expert, right? Bridging that gap. I think that would greatly help this community. One person dedicated to communications, from elected officials to residents, or from village staff to the residents. Those I think that would be a good piece.
Nice. I love to hear that, and it sounds like you guys are very intentional in how you reach out to the community. So the next one is, what is a task that you think AI could help you with? And then what is a task that AI could never help you with?
I think AI would be a good use for creating ordinances or ordinance updates. I think that would eliminate some of the time that goes through some of that. Obviously, it still needs to be reviewed. I think the thing that AI couldn't necessarily help me with, development, like review, like as a proposal, I think it lacks some of the context. And I think there's a human element to explain the context of what a development can really do to spur or create the change that a community might be looking at within a specific property.
I definitely want to get back to that one. But first, let's circle back. So any thought on what is a great policy on paper, but is hard or nearly impossible to execute in real life?
I'm going to circle back to what we talked about earlier, and it's going to be employee reviews, right? And how you judge that, from whether being a department head to, or a leader of a department heads. And that's kind of where I think what we talked about earlier with the comprehensive plan, goals and objectives, how do you tie those to each department and what they're working towards? I think it makes it a little bit easier, because I think it's hard to do it. It's great in theory to do reviews, but I think it's nearly impossible to always get right.
No, I appreciate you being candid there. So the person that was needed on staff was communication. And then with AI could help with land ordinances, but AI could not help with understanding the spirit of development. Any of those you want to double click on to give more clarity?
I think AI would be helpful for almost any ordinance, or a policy, right? To be that starting point. I always find it challenging when I either create an ordinance or create a policy. It's that beginning piece. You have the idea in your head. You know what you're trying to accomplish. It's how do you transcribe that into words on a piece of paper that makes sense and accomplishes what you're trying to do. So I think using that, it kind of takes that maybe mental block or mental fog at the very beginning and kind of gives you that piece. But then it also can spur greater thought within within yourself is, I never thought of it that way. Like I was looking at it through this lens. Now I have a wider lens. And I think the more information that you're able to provide when you're looking at ordinances, it's really how the community is governed and like the tools that the administration or government has to achieve the goals that the community has laid out in its vision. I think AI can give you the opportunity of things that maybe internally you didn't think of yourself. And I guess that's another big piece for myself is I don't never profess to say or think that I know everything. I'm more of a listener first to hear all the viewpoints. And then I like to kind of lead through based on that discussion. I think AI can help you with that, but it needs to be checked and balanced as well.
Awesome. Well, let me jump ahead. Oh, before we do, you spoke of the spirit of development. Do you want to double click on that at all?
I think from a site plan and visual element, it can create the visual experience that maybe somebody needs to understand what that development scope is going to be. But I think there's also a little bit of context, right? If you're looking at a blighted, building, it may take that building rendition and adaptively reuse it, or it creates something completely different. But there's a lot of context and there's a lot of nuances that happen within development that I think, solely relying on that would be a little bit dangerous. And nobody knows the community better than the individual tasked with those projects. And I think you can, again, maybe it's a starting point to get the visual as to how you tackle a tough project. But I think it is also probably more beneficial to take that and apply what you also know that the AI won't necessarily know about the community character or fabric or anything along those lines.
Love that. So shifting to our next three, what is the hardest truth you wish residents understood about trade-offs and timelines?
Being a community that went through a data center application, one of the hardest things I think people have had understanding is that those conversations had been going on for quite some time. And it's not that the community signed a non-disclosure agreement or anything along those lines. I think the hardest piece is that there's so many elements to development that need to be flushed out and internalized between either the business and development, but also staff. How do we get from point A, which is the initial meeting, to point Z? You're in front of the plan commission or a public hearing and your development, proposal is out there. There's multiple steps that happen within that time period. And there's a lot of negotiation. And I think from that standpoint, if there was one way I could reach out to citizens, it would say, staff is looking out for the best interests of the community, but also trying to put how do we put the brakes on something, right? Conversations or can break down over time. And if it's not right to be in front of the elected body, it's not necessarily right to be in front of the community. There's no sense in creating hostility amongst community members, whether you support or don't support the project, but it's more of let everybody kind of flush out all of the details so that when it gets brought in front of the general public, we're able to provide you as much information as humanly possible.
Makes a ton of sense. You want to bring people along for the ride, and also you ask for the trust that you're doing the best thing for the community. So the next one, what is the most common hidden cost for development constraints? So is it utilities, ownership, zoning, or politics?
Man, is it possible to say all of the above? For the village of Caledonia, I would say utilities, because we do have a sewer intergovernmental agreement with the surrounding communities on sewer and water, which means we have a sewer capacity element that goes into development review. Zoning, I'd say it's zoning and politics. Zoning, because that's where you get into the prohibitive nature of what is allowed on a parcel of land. And then from zoning, you go to politics, because if your development doesn't fit within the realm of what that zoning classification currently is, you're asking for a rezone. And I think sometimes it's a little easier for politics to supersede policy. And so politics takes the forefront politics takes the forefront over what may be a good policy decision for the community as a whole. So I think kind of all of them are intertwined. Maybe all are equally pitfalls. It's just how you inform your elected body, how you inform the community. And that's really the meat and potatoes of how you get a project to the finish line.
Yeah, I get that one a lot. That people saying, "Can I say all of the above?" So that's why I laughed there. What is the biggest long-term risk that cannot be addressed in a 2 to 4 year election cycle?
Planning, comprehensive planning, that becomes difficult. And then I would also say the use of tax incremental financing. You don't necessarily see the end result within 2 to 4 years of an election cycle. So I would say those would be my 3 top choices.
Okay. Now we're into even more fun. So I'm going to be giving you some free money here. So the last 3 questions are just a matter of degree. So the first is, what would you address, challenge, or need in the community with $100,000 added to your budget? The second is, what challenge or need would you address with $1 million added to your budget? And then the final one is, if you had unlimited money, unlimited staff, unlimited resources for an entire year, what challenge or need would you address in the community?
I think $100,000, I would use that towards supplying a year's worth of free rent, or, for a new startup local or regional business, or as many of local or regional businesses as I could. I think those are keys to economic development. The more you keep it in the local and regional aspect, you're allowing the community to essentially grow with that business and maybe spur other opportunities that you didn't know that existed. $1 million, I would draw down the price of the Kmart, and I wouldn't necessarily have to try to incentivize it as much as I might need to get that project done. And then if I had unlimited amounts of budget, I would probably utilize the money to pay off the debt for that TID 5 property and allow it to maybe be more of a community orientated space, whether it becomes a place where you have some level of a band shell or some community amenity where it becomes a place for community members to gather. It's right on the lake. It's got a beautiful backdrop to it. So I think I would take that and maybe switch in a direction where I don't necessarily have to rely on development to happen for that property to be a community benefit.
I love that. All very practical, from spurring local business to being able to not have to incentivize a property as much, and then to take something and make it into a community space. I think you've hit all the needs of the community with all 3 of those answers. So, Todd, I just wanted to say thank you from everyone here at Gentry. This has been a great episode, and really learned a lot about the village of Caledonia. So we wanted to say thank you. And then to the viewers, I'd like to thank you for being here. But Todd, before we officially close out, is there any last words that you'd like to leave us before we close?
Well, I would start with Caledonia is a great place. Obviously, I'm going to plug my community. The staff is wonderful, and the culture that we have created together over the past 16 to 18 months has been fantastic. And then also, I'm always willing to take questions or to bounce ideas off or get a third party perspective. I may not know all of the details of what the question is, but I'll try to give you an alternative perspective from from a standpoint of maybe being in the trenches, sometimes the similar trenches that the requester has asked.
Nice. Well, Todd, thank you again. I appreciate it. And from everyone here at Gentry, we'd like to say thank you and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.